Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome back to the Story 516 podcast. I'm Zach, and I'm joined by another returning guest, Andrew Bartlett. Andrew, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and just like the last few episodes, we've been talking about a favorite Bible story. The heart behind this is to hear different people's kind of perspectives on what's their favorite Bible story or a favorite Bible story, something that's meaningful, and kind of dive into like the why behind it connected with each individual, with the hope of anyone who's listening in that it might spark in you, the listener, a new idea of how to approach a Bible study or just a new way to see one of these stories, some new perspective to kind of think about.
Yeah.
We'd all agree that like thinking about the Bible more isn't like, that is not a bad way to spend your time.
Exactly.
Better than TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever.
I like it.
So, Andrew, what story from the Bible are we talking about today?
Okay. Yeah. So I was thinking about it on the drive over, and honestly, if you were asked pretty much anyone that knows me, they would already tell you this is the one I would talk about. I think my favorite story is Nehemiah. And it's a toss up. Like if you're asked what's my favorite book of the Bible, it would be a toss up between Nehemiah and Proverbs. Proverbs just being super everyday, like super practical, just like go to all the time. Nehemiah is probably my favorite story in the Bible. Or like narrative, I guess. Formats like Proverbs is a different format, so like they're different book styles.
Yeah.
What I love about Nehemiah, though there's a lot of things, but part of it is it's sort of unique in that it is one of the only books that's written in first person, which is, most of the other narratives in the Bible are kind of in I guess I don't know if it's like third person or whatever, where it's kind of like telling you about this person and their story. But this one's actually written by the guy whose story it was. And so, or at least it's written in, I'm assuming I don't know. I'm not a theologian. I think it was written by him, or at least it was written in first person. And so there's like, it opens with him. He's, a cupbearer to the king. So he's actually a pretty high up individual in the Babylonian Empire. But like, I feel like I can just relate to Nehemiah in so many ways, just from like a human element, because he writes in first person. So like he talks about where it's like he knew he needed to talk to the king, but he was sort of afraid to do it. And so he said a quick prayer, silently, and then asked him. There's nowhere else in the Bible that really talks about prayer in that way, where it was like, I don't remember the exact how it's worded, but it was like, it just felt very relatable, where it was like, prayer, I feel like most places is like, it's okay, so he had this whole prayer and this whole thing, and then he went and did the thing. But
right, like it's a big event almost, or a big speech, or think like if you're familiar with theater, like a Shakespearean monologue,
right,
where you pause, say this 2-paragraph prayer, and then move on.
Yeah. It was cool to see where it's like, okay, we're actually not that much different from the people back then. They were humans just exactly like we are, just in given different circumstances. So I think that was super cool. I think the other thing I love about Nehemiah is just he is a very ambitious, like visionary kind of guy, but also like could get things done.
Yeah.
And he was sort of no nonsense too. So like there's some pretty crazy stuff that he did too, where it's like, pulling people's hair out and, not cussing them out exactly, because whatever the Christian, like they went right next door to that, basically, of like, get with the program here, people, like you're being lazy turds over here. So anyway, so like the story of Nehemiah is super interesting. So like him going back, basically like, the Lord being in his favor, of like literally the king sending him. And it's actually also interesting because there's, not only is there the book of Nehemiah, but then there's the book of Ezra, which then references Nehemiah. It's like so you get like a third person perspective on Nehemiah from the book of Ezra.
Yeah.
In addition to reading Ezra's side of it, or sorry, Nehemiah's side of it. And so there's like more context to where, like, how crazy of a thing was that he was able to like go back to the land of Israel to like first of all, take a look. One of the other principles that I love from it is he went back and he didn't tell anyone what his plan was. I feel like a lot of times it's very, as like an entrepreneurial person, or as somebody who's like, I'm always having lots of ideas, it's the tendency is to talk way more than you do,
Right.
and you
Right.
have all these big grandiose ideas. And so he kind of followed the principle of like counting the cost. So like he first of all, he went at night so that no one would see him, and those kind of things. And he rode around and just surveyed the state of the wall, the state of the city, the people, like all this kind of stuff, and then put together a plan. It was like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And he was also just a really cool like leader and delegator, where he put together this plan that they rebuilt Jerusalem, the wall, in record time, like so fast that literally people couldn't like believe it. And as he like broke it down into like bite-sized pieces,
Right.
that every family did their section of the wall right by where they live.
So this might be dating us a little, but it was like Extreme Makeover Wall Edition.
Yes, there you go. I like it. I like it. Um, and it was also like not, and also just like his faith in God, that he knew this was the thing he needed to do, take on this huge, basically impossible task, right? So like the point of the way that Jerusalem was broken down was that it wouldn't be able to be rebuilt. When a conquering enemy, they would come in and try to sabotage foundations, destroy stuff, so that it would make it very difficult, at least, to rebuild. So not only were they doing that, but there's also like another point in there where basically they're doing this, we're building it also under attack constantly from the people around them. So literally having to build it with the sword in one hand and the trowel in the other. I think it talks
Yeah.
about something like that. And then there's just so many back and forth stories of like the people trying to sabotage him from inside, and then also like the surrounding people trying to go to the king of Babylon to like, oh, see, Nehemiah, he's actually doing it so he can rebel from you, and trying to sabotage him at a political level. And so I still think it would be a super cool, like, it's kind of like what you say, like Nolan did with the Batman series, where it's like made it
Yeah.
super like like a lot of like depth of character and like world building. What I feel like people tend to do with Bible stories is they make it kind of like the cartoon version of it. But I feel like the story of Nehemiah, if you put that into a movie, like with so much intrigue of like not only trying to do a task, and he had a certain timeline too that he gave the king, that I'm going to do it within
Yeah.
this amount of time, and then I'm going to come back.
So you have like the internal political machinations, the external warfare
Yep.
plotline, the plotline about just the wall. Like,
Yeah, there's just so much to that story, and it's so like, and again, it's written in first person, to where you're hearing his sort of inner dialogue about this whole thing going
yeah.
down. And so, and again, then you have Ezra's perspective on it, and there's just so much around it that it's such a cool and inspiring story. For me, as like leading a team, I'm always inspired by it, where it's like he was very selfless in it too, and like he was right there with him. He wasn't just like a boss. He put his life on the line to make this project happen. So anyway, that's I think why I love the story of Nehemiah so much, is it feels relatable, even though the like circumstances are like insane, to
Yeah.
try to do that kind of thing.
That seems like a lot of life lessons can be taken from that too, where it's like, how many times do we feel like a project, a relationship, health, some circumstance in life has been just completely annihilated, like the walls,
Yeah.
and we're trying to build it back,
Yeah.
build it, like rebuild that part of ourselves, our lives.
Yeah.
And we feel like maybe we're under constant attack or things are trying to sabotage us, but staying faithful.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a very inspiring story for people going through some situation like that.
Yeah. And this is a quick side tangent, but like there's a lot of like this idea of like standing in the gap. I remember hearing somebody talk about this a while back, but this idea of, for such a time as this, there's oftentimes people who spend their entire life in obscurity, only to be the exact right person for that exact thing at that exact moment, where it's like, so it's almost like an encouragement of, just because it doesn't seem like you're maybe making a difference, or like,
Right.
something throughout your life, like what have I really accomplished? Sometimes like you can spend an entire lifetime leading you to one moment, and it may not even be something you even know that you had an impact on somebody. But like if you're just following what God has for you, you can be that person to stand in the gap. And I think from like a broader, even like cultural standpoint too, it's this idea, it's like such a cool visual of like rebuilding this defense, like this wall, not to get not talking politically literally necessarily,
Right.
but in the sense of like standing in the gap against like this onslaught of evil, and like this onslaught of whether it's like false ideologies and propaganda of the time and stuff like that, of being that one. There's also, this is not in the Bible, but that's, if you like the story of Nehemiah, the story of Malta is insane. So it's during the Crusades, I think, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on timelines. I'm not a big history person. I'm a big history person, but I can never remember any of the details. Okay, so
big history fan, not a historian.
there you go. But it's kind of this idea too, where like they were the last standing bastion of Christianity, if you want to call it that. In that time with these Muslim hordes essentially overtaking all of like Europe or wherever Malta is. Again, geography also not a big strong point.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's not in Middle Earth, so I'm a little helpless.
But it was sort of a similar thing. It was like the Knights of Malta stood in the gap, and basically they stopped all of Europe from becoming Muslim during that time. And they were like the walls of Malta being like kind of like this similar moment in like history, in like more recent history, than the Nehemiah times. So anyway, those are a couple stories that like, again, like the Knights of Malta, like literally I think he was like the head guy or whatever, was like, he was wounded, whatever. He was like, give me my chair. Like stuck his chair in the gap in the wall and held that gap in the wall for like an insane amount of time, all by himself, sitting in his chair because he was wounded too much to stand. It's those kind of imagery like that, and Nehemiah and this kind of stuff, where like to me is just so inspiring, of like, so much what we deal with is first world problems.
Right.
It's so easy to get in your head about like, I think especially if your focus is too much on yourself or on your own life, all of a sudden problems become so big that they seem insurmountable. But when you kind of start to like get perspective, like this whole cloud of witnesses that we have, and these stories that are like true stories from history, from the Bible, from history, it helps put like your struggles into perspective.
Yeah.
Not to minimize struggles, obviously,
right.
but sometimes struggles don't seem so insurmountable when you realize,
that you're part of like a bigger story going on.
Yeah.
And even like you said, we have the Bible story from like world history, which the Bible also has stories from world history too. But I even think in fiction, like when you were talking, I was like, oh, like for such a time as this kind of idea is like It's a Wonderful Life. Where the main character, George Bailey, gets to see what his community. So it's not this giant political or worldwide event or war or anything. It's just his community. But he gets to see what the people in his lives were like had he not been a part of them. It's like, we don't know. I have no basis for this, but I like to think that in heaven, in the next life, God will be able to like take each one of us aside and just be like, hey, you didn't know all these ways that you impacted people, but I want you to see it now. And we'll have our own little like George Bailey, It's a Wonderful Life moment.
There you go. Maybe are we gonna all have like in video games, you have your stats? No, I was kidding. That'd probably be bad. But in heaven there's no sin, so like I guess there wouldn't be jealousy, but it would be kind of sick, like to see like you like open your dashboard and you see like the stats. Like
when you did this, you didn't realize it, but you leveled up.
Exactly. Level 10? No way. No. I think it's so cool. And I think just getting back to like Nehemiah, he was willing to like put his neck out there for something that seemed insane. And like, but at the same time, like I think there's a lot of times it's easy to have big ideas, but then not act on them. So I think that's the thing where it's like he counted the cost, he put together a plan, and then he executed. And so I think that's also inspiring to me, of like, okay, it's all fine and dandy to be a dreamer, but like you got to start putting pen to paper. You just got to start, actually doing stuff. And then I think also obviously following what God wants you to do. He's going to be with you, and he's going to allow you to do things there's no way that you could do on your own. So, yeah.
Because it would look a lot different had the story been like Nehemiah by himself without God's prompting or guidance. Been like, guess what? I'm going to build this wall.
Exactly.
Might not have turned out the same way.
Yeah. And he had the right heart for why he was doing it. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing about that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.